Okay, go ahead.
We'll call the finance meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Pat Kinney,
Here.
Blake Ellefson,
Here.
Dick Pufo,
Here.
Brad Ray,
Here.
Ron Stendor.
Here. Number 2, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Ray, so moved.
Blake will Ron will second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Just turn it off. Thank you. Next, we'll go to public comments. Any public comments? Anyone online for public comments? Anyone online on Zoom or the phone for public comments? Hearing none, we'll go to number 4. Approval of Finance and Economic Development meeting minutes from May 9th. Is
Blake
there a
will
motion
make-
to approve?
Blake will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Ronald, second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Going to number 5, discussion and action of with our financial consultants, Mike and Steve.
Just joined, so can you give him a second to,
Okay. Do we have Steve with us today?
Steve's on vacation.
Okay, so we have Mike with us today.
He's connecting right now. Mike, you're up.
Okay. Thanks. You have the report, Dan?
Yep, I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay.
And this was uploaded to the packet, everyone.
Okay, good. Yeah, hello, everybody. I know it's been a while since I've reported to you. I know Steve took the last couple of months, so what we have here is the budget status summary report as of March 31st. So the first quarter of the year. I just kind of want to walk you through that. I know you do have some new members on finance that may not be familiar with this. And maybe just as a little introduction, we have the county accounting funds listed with the budget in column E there. You starting with the general fund and going human services right on down the line. And what we do is we deduct the tax levy because that's basically recorded as of January 1 as a revenue. And then we have the budget minus the tax levy and compare that to the actual year-to-date revenues and expenditures. And then we have a actual year-to-date percentage compared to budget, and then a column with the 23 prior year as of March. So you can see, obviously, March is 3 months, 25% of the year. And if you look at the revenues, I guess you see a big difference in year-to-date revenues for the general fund, about 2.5 million. Last year, 982,000. Well, I think most of you are aware there's one transaction that significantly increased the 24 number. You received 1,873,000 from the state of Wisconsin as a aid for the tax exempt properties on tribal lands. And so that is sitting in there as a revenue right now in the general fund. Now there's the county still, and we're working with Dan a little bit to how we're going to process or record that revenue, because it's really reimbursing the county, for previously unpaid taxes that were ruled illegal. So that will eventually be moved to the balance sheet, which means reducing those taxes. But, it's gonna increase the county's unassigned general fund by a fairly significant amount. Now, there's some of that money possibly needs to be paid to other entities, possibly the town. So we're still working through those issues. But anyway, that's the big reason of the big change from 24 to from 23. If you go on down the line there, there's nothing else really on the revenue side that I think is significant compared to prior years. You can see in total, the county's got about 19% of your revenues in, but obviously that million that I just talked about would significantly reduce that percentage. There's a lot of revenues for human services don't come in for months after you earn them. So I mean, there's nothing unusual on the revenue side that I would point out to you. And then if you want to move down to the expenses and expenditures, again, you can see, I mean, the numbers fairly line up to the prior year. I would make just to point out county road and bridge expenditures you can see are significantly less than 23, 177. We only have 2 months in there. And in 23, we have 3 months. They're still working through some changes in the accounting system regarding a new automated timekeeping that's preventing that, but that's hoped to be resolved very soon. And you should have the numbers up to date next month. They're kind of the numbers were spent, but they aren't allocating properly to record them. Debt service, that's pretty much paid when you earlier in the year when you for the most part pay off your long-term debt. So let's keep on going down. I don't think there's anything else in there that I would suggest looks like a problem. I mean, it's only 3 months into the year. But it's hard to, there's nothing that we're aware of unanticipated expenditures that have hit the books already. So I guess I'll take any questions. If anybody has any.
Any questions?
So you kind of started to talk about the 1.6 variance in revenue that was, or 1.8 ultimately from the change or the reimbursement on the taxes.
Right.
Sounds like there's quite a bit of impacts or noise that's going to come from that. And we're not quite sure yet how it's all going to play out. Is there anything that maybe as we come, because it's going to have a long-term impact on our balance sheet, and just maybe as a committee, I don't think there's much we can do, but just to understand that and what it ultimately is going to look like at the end. You don't have to go through it now because obviously you haven't decided how these buckets are going to get, but maybe just long-term, just so we understand what the implications are.
Yeah. Well, I'm fairly certain, we don't know the exact amount yet, but it's going to have a positive impact on your balance sheet. See, and the way, and previous to this, you had all these taxes are recorded as a receivable because they were levied, and they were unpaid. In a sense, what the state did, it said, hey, we know you have to write these off. We're going to give you a partial refund of these amounts because, you've been levying them based on what you knew that it was taxable land and the Department of Revenue agreed with you. So the delinquent taxes, maybe not to get too deep into this, are considered a receivable, so they're part of your equity. But they were considered non-spendable equity because they weren't cash. You know, they were out there as a receivable. So this is gonna move a portion of those delinquent taxes to the spendable because you got money for them. And so that will have a positive impact on your general fund balance. Spendable general fund balance. And I looked at, Dan and I talked the other day, your general fund balance at the end of 22, now 23 is being audited. But I don't believe it's gonna, you had about $500,000 to start the year 23 in your general fund. So, you know, assuming you had a I think you might have had a positive budget year in 23, so that would go up a little, but this would increase it more when you pull down the collection of delinquent taxes. So
Yeah, so
we
we
hope
should-
to have that in the next month or two, have that worked out.
Yeah, so we should end up having a general fund balance of a little less than 3 million after we take care of all this stuff.
Yeah, it could be in that range, yeah.
Dan, why don't we add this issue to that list that's in number 10? Because that does have a lot of implications, not just working through the details, but where we end up.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we're gonna take this issue up at zoning about
And-
writing off the receivables. And then we would use the money from the state to replace that. Because and then we could take it up at the next finance committee meeting, and then the county board ultimately has to approve the write-off of all those receivables. So, but yeah, so we'll put it on for
Okay.
next meeting.
All right. So Mike, in the 2022 audit, this is why that shows up with such a big delinquent taxes, is from the Sanborn case?
Yeah, in part, right.
Okay.
Yes, yes,
Alright.
that's basically it, right? And those have been carried on the books, you know, for years, obviously, each year, but they haven't been collected.
Okay. Anything else with Mike right now? And you're gonna stay with us, Mike?
Yeah, I'll stay with you when you talk about that other agenda item.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Thank you.
Sure.
Next, we'll go to number 6, the county investment policy. And I'd asked for this to be on there because I did not know how we were determining when we would ask for different rates as interest rates go up and down. And what struck me is there should be a process where the county is talking to the bank and reviewing rates so that it's a process. You meet every so often or check with each other, and that way neither party has to, you know, take the initiative. So when I read through the document that's attached, it doesn't have on a policy end, on our end, just a regular, whatever frequency would seem to work for the bank and the treasurer, just to say, hey, how does this look?
I don't want to speak for Tracy, but I believe she plans on meeting quarterly with the bank.
Okay, so something they could do then is on this report is perhaps just at the end of it or the beginning of it, just something, rates were last reviewed and put a date there, and then it's on the document. We all know what that would be.
Yeah, we could just put it as, at the end of the agenda, like, you know, when we do the health insurance and investments and sales tax, we could just add another line item, or we could put it in my updates and say, as part of my update, the rates were just last reviewed on whatever date it was.
The treasurer generates the report though, correct?
The the treasurer can just have a little written thing, yeah, saying,
Yeah, just whichever way is most convenient, then.
Yeah.
It's easy reference. And the other question I had is, and this, Blake might be able to answer this in part. So the CD, we're getting 5%, other things we're getting a lower rate.
right. Well, I think everything changed to 5% now.
But on this report, there's just the one with the 5%.
Okay, yeah, because those CDs had not matured yet. As soon as they mature, they'll get the higher rate.
I don't have the information in front of me, but I think after the last discussion, when you asked about rate, she went in and they talked about rate and moved everything up on the
Right.
county accounts to 5%.
Yeah, I figured that.
It seemed, yeah, so I think if we go back and you bring up the policy though, I just wanted to,
Which,
this investment policy.
Yeah.
So I just, when I came in to Northern State, I looked at our investment policy, rewrote it. We approve it annually. I think it might be a good idea to just have Tracy take a look at it. Just refresh it with the date of, hey, reviewed and approved on. And then what he said is just having that periodic conversation with the bank, because those rates do change.
Yep.
I think that but right now I would say, now that we have these monies in our accounts, this is becoming a little bit better conversation for us. And it's very timely because rates are much higher. And I do know there's some municipal accounts that do pay 5%. So if Northern State moved it to that and was comparable, that's a pretty attractive rate for an operating account.
and I could say that I'm fairly certain the rates are gonna go down in the fall.
Well, we know they're gonna.
No, we
Okay.
never, ever talk about which way interest rates are gonna go. As the person who manages interest rate risk, never do I ever guess which rates are gonna go. I've learned that, and we should all do that.
I was gonna say, we do know that rates change. And so, and that's why having a regular process to review them, then neither side has the uncomfortable task of saying, hey, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Just as far as maintaining relationships. If you could go to the page above that. So we've got a list of things here, and I don't know from an investment end, if I were at the bank, you've got these different categories with money market savings accounts. So two questions. Why do we have different categories for the investments? And does that impact the rate of return the county would get or the bank's ability to invest that so it works out best for everybody?
Yes, it does affect the rate of return. Any monies that we are not gonna need in the near future are being put into CDs. Monies that we may need in the short, in the medium term would go into money markets. And the two savings accounts are just money we're holding for other organizations. So we don't get any interest accrued off of those. And the checking accounts is our daily use money, so.
So question in my mind after that then is this. We know payroll and benefits are, 3/4 or so of the budget, and we know that like clockwork, what to expect. Does that give us any capacity, as far as the stream of payments and when we need money to invest larger quantities of money for longer periods of time and get a higher rate, which would help the county and potentially the bank then?
Can I speak to
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Okay, so we're on an inverted yield curve. It's costly, it's more beneficial to stay in cash than it is to go and invest your money longer term. The rates, it's counterintuitive, but for me to go out 5 and 10 years, I have to take a hit on my cash. That's what I'm doing every
Okay.
day. So right now, your best yield is in short-term cash, which is, again, counterintuitive because longer term, you want to be able to lock in these yields in a down rate environment, which,
No, I'm at,
but what you're saying is finally we
I'm
have
not-
these monies that are investable.
no, what I'm saying in general, and I'm not talking about a specific direction of the market right now. I'm talking about just in general as a matter of practice. Not given where we're at in the market cycle.
So I think because we have funds, we would look to maybe add some duration to lock in some of these yields. But we're talking about, we're not buying treasuries, we're not buying investments, we're talking about cash. That's the only thing the county's authorized to make as an investment right now. CDs, money markets, those are all cash, right?
Yeah,
So, and these have to be pledged to. So Northern State Bank is putting treasuries and other guaranteed assets to these funds to secure them so that you're 100% collateralized.
Okay.
And so I think there's a difference between operating balances. The fact that Northern State Bank is paying 5% on your cash that you need That's pretty good. Most municipalities or counties are not getting that type of yield on a short-term operating balance. And they've moved all of it to 5%. So I think right now, the county's actually in a really good spot as far as, you know, what they're getting on their cash as well as what they're gonna have in their CDs.
Well, I would agree with that. It's just that we're not any long-term on average, regardless of where we're in the market cycle averaging it all. Over time, if we were able to pool some of that, knowing we wouldn't need some of that for longer terms, is not really an advantage to us, is what you're saying.
There could be, and I think we should be preparing our investment policy not to time the market, but to take advantage of, if it wasn't an inverted rate right now, it might make sense to do exactly what you're doing, is to take a little bit long. If we have funds that we can tie up for 3 years and we can earn 6% on a CD versus 5%, we would do that. But now you'd only earn 4% on a CD if you go out 3 years versus 5% in
Yeah.
cash. So and I don't know if Mike wants to speak on that, but I think, you know, this is a good conversation that our board or finance committee's having, and I think we're going in the right direction.
Do you want, we can just keep this on the agenda as a standing item, and we can get an update every month or 2 months, whatever you
Yeah.
prefer.
Yeah, okay. All right, so then. Next, we will go to number 7, the BEAD funding.
Okay, this is something I just wanted to give you a heads up on. So BEAD is the broadband equity and accessibility something. Access and deployment, yeah. So the way BEAD is working, broadband providers bid out to do specific communities, and they get awarded points based on affordability, ability to do the work, how many underserved people they're doing. But about 20% of the points comes from counties who we recommend as the provider for whatever area it is. So, you know, I met with Norvato today, and I'm meeting with Bayfield Wireless tomorrow. I got a map here that Norvato gave me this morning to show you, and I'll let you guys pass it around. Basically, the red areas are ineligible for BEAD funding. The pink areas are where we want to are where they're going to concentrate on. And this is, like I said, it's just a heads up. We're at some point, this committee, and probably executive committee too, is going to get a request for an agreement to say company X is going to do the area outside of Mellon, because they provided the best deal for the residents of that area. The PSC has not released the final plan for the second BEAD tranche of money. First one went out already, and you know they were doing jingles. So if you saw that construction on 112, that was part of what Norvato was doing with the first round of BEAD. They're also going to work on the town of Ashland, which is on the map, that purple area, right past south of Ashland. The one thing they're not going to be working on is Bad River and any of the BEAD stuff. Bad River has their own grants and their own plans to do it.
So it sounds like we're looking at the contractors.
Yeah,
And
we're
then-
going to decide who the contractors are for any specific area.
So the contractors will bid prices, and then we'll see those bids and be able to give them votes on who we know. So if they're local or.
Yeah. So, yeah, but this is all federal money being deployed to pay for all of this. Feds are paying for 75% of the cost.
In the agenda build, the second to last sentence, it says county boards will be able to vote on and recommend specific providers for specific, and then there's a period. Is that, was there another word coming after specific or something, or what happened there? It left me hanging.
It's probably just a typo on my part. Yeah, that second for specific should not be there.
Okay, I was just wondering. Anything else on the bead funding?
No, and we'll be taking this item up again frequently as the process moves along. I want to give you just a heads up of where we're at.
All right. Next, we will go to item 8, the jail improvement fund.
So, Mr. Stender was on the jail tour. At the jail, and I believe Chief Deputy Delegate is on this line. Yeah, Nate,
Yeah, go
we're
ahead.
talking about the doors at the jail. So, Nate, do you want to explain the problem with the doors?
Yeah, so these are petition doors we're talking about here in between the jail cells. Let me- Okay, so there's actually two issues. There's one issue where we need to convert some doors into having food slots, because what they did in the jail is they converted one of the units into like a discipline unit if they need to be, if they need to isolate people, they can do that. And within this cell that they're renovating now or trying to fix the doors on, they couldn't do that because they didn't have food slots. So in order for them cells to be single cells in there, they needed food slots to convert that cell over, and this was a part of that.
So the sheriff's department is requesting to use 37,000 from the inmate wellness fund.
The agenda bill says 20,000.
That
The first bid is
20,000.
yeah, the first bid is 21,510. And the
Right.
agenda bill says 20,000. So for clarification, Nate, are you asking for 20,000 or 21,510?
Well, can you scroll down on that, Dan? I want to see that bottom part again. Hold on right there. And they're saying the total labor on that was 37 on the bottom of this one, Dan. Scroll down again. Yeah, I can verify with Jen to see what,
You want to call Jen up and then we could come back to this item?
yeah, why don't you just let me mute for a second and I'll track her down.
Like, Mr. Chairman, can we just move to the next agenda item and come back to this?
Yeah, we'll go to the next one. We'll go to agenda item number 9, the grant writer priorities.
So so she's starting, I guess everybody should know, we hired a grant writer, Erica Hanikel from the college, Northern College. She's starting August 5th. But one of the things she needs before she starts is to know exactly what kind of grant she's going to look for. What are the priorities the county wants her to pursue? So I'm bringing this question to you guys. And I will put this on the agenda again for next month's meeting. So you guys have time to think about it and add to it or take away.
Blake?
I would add affordable housing. Oh. Affordable housing. There was a significant grant that was secured by Bayfield County. They have a $15 million project, and I would say that there is a significant amount of dollars available for low income areas, which we qualify for, both federally and state. So I don't know exactly if affordable housing or housing in general. It doesn't have to be just affordable, but
There's a lot of money out there for workforce housing. Are there
Others?
other ideas?
On the notes that I made, it would seem that we should compile a list of the grants the county's already getting from the different departments, things that they do. And the assumption when we hired the grant writer, I believe, is that the departments that are writing their own grants for the things that they do, they would continue to do that.
Mhm.
But it would be good for the grant writer to know who's writing what grants that they routinely get or expect to get for their department, so there's not overlap of effort there, or duplication where two grants are getting submitted for the same thing. But it also would help the grant writer to understand, what the departments are doing, and in those conversations, hopefully help them understand where some gaps might be. And in particular, looking at the budget for each department. So if each department says, here are the things that we could use, like, for example, the jail right now, needs some modification of doors. I have no idea if there's grant money for something like that or not. But, as we look through the budget, are there any things in there where grants might be helpful? But, and I don't know the answer, but it would give her that background, which I think would be a good starting point. I think working with the local townships and going down Highway 13, Mellon, Glidden, Butternut, et cetera, I think working with those communities is really important in terms of helping them stay as vibrant as possible. For those of us that are old enough that were around here and remember the farm crisis in the 80s, 1988 in particular with the drought year, what that did to local communities. And that was, in my recollection in the farm papers, the first year where a lot of people realized that if the farm economy suffers, the local communities suffer too. I mean, it wasn't rocket scientists, but if farmers are struggling and there's not money there, then the community is going to struggle. So, and that just meant that people left the small communities and everything got harder. So I think trying to keep, as much economic vibrancy in outside of the city of Ashland is important for a lot of reasons in terms of our economy, our tax base, et cetera. So I think really reaching out to them would be good. And another thing from our board meeting Tuesday, we anticipate we're going to have to update courthouse security here in the next few years. Apparently that's a given.
Mhm.
That's the sort of thing that if we're looking for grant money, we might be able to find some to do that project. So we're not, scrambling at the last minute. So could the department heads put a list together of the grants that they apply for and sources that they know?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
One of the ideas that kind of came to mind was, Bayfield County has a little bit been more progressive on grants and maybe getting ahead of it. And if we can, and I don't know who the best person would be for this, but coming or compiling a list of, whether it's the Federal Home Loan Bank in Chicago, who the contacts are there,
Mhm.
Who the USDA, rural government, there's all these different, these are the entities that are going to be giving the money, but having those relationships or contacts. So they come in and they feel like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm not starting from scratch because yeah, you're gonna get asked to write 100 grants, but you gotta be able to create the sausage first. And so having some of those relationships and contacts on the front end, so your first week isn't just spent, scrambling, try to think of grants. It's like, okay, there's some contacts I need to meet, sending them to maybe some training and county related grant writers. Those are the type of things that we want to set them up for success long-term.
Yeah, and I already actually started doing that. She went to a seminar down in Wausau last week, the USDA put on. So she got to meet a lot of the federal government people, Bad Rivers grant writer, and other grant writers in the state. So yeah, she definitely learned a lot there and was excited about it. So as these opportunities come up, we'll certainly send her to those.
And then I think on your end, you're her supervisor, correct?
Correct.
I think it's gonna be really important that you have a regular conversation so that the things that she's writing grants for fit the county's needs. And if there's a match that we know that we're gonna be able to come up with it and, it fits the bigger picture of what the county's doing versus, something that we might not know quite what to do with, even though it sounds good.
Yeah.
And then, I assume she's also gonna look at what is the probabilities of getting a certain grant. Some you have a good chance of getting, others it's a lower chance, so that I think early on in trying to develop that office, putting effort into things where you have a higher probability of success.
Yeah.
You know, to bring in some money. Because obviously, I think we all know that there's going to be a metric of, is this paying for itself?
Right.
And it helps to set it up for success and then hopefully growth after that in terms of a grant writing office.
Speaking of that metric, I mean, I want everybody in this room to understand that it's going to take a while.
you know.
It's not going to happen overnight. So we can't say, oh, well, we tried it for 6 months and it didn't work. Well, I'm sorry, the process doesn't work like that. I mean, it's literally a 2-3 year process before you start really seeing results.
So we'll come back to this next meeting and add to the list. And
Yeah.
if you have a list that staff is putting together, I think it would help us to understand more of what the county is already doing, because I assume that you folks know more than we do as far as grant writing efforts in the county.
Yeah.
Nate, are you back with us yet?
Yeah, so I can explain that. The 37,000 can be disregarded. That was just an estimate of what it costs to replace the doors themselves. The 21,000 comes in for just us to modify the doors and get the food slots put in them for our existing doors.
So this is an action item. The agenda bill says 20,000, but the bid is 21,510. Which number are you looking for?
The 21,500.
All right, and that would come from the jail inmate wellness fund, right?
Yes, that's what
Right.
the intent of that. And Nate, I take it that that's an appropriate use of those funds?
Yes.
And take it public property and law enforcement's already reviewed this?
No, they have not.
I haven't seen anything in there.
No, but they already went and saw it and agreed that this needs to be done. And
Okay,
Mr. Stendor was on that tour. And so was Brad.
okay. Do we have a motion? Ron, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we use these funds to take care of those doors.
A specific amount?
Oh, here.
He's asking for $21,510.
What? I'll make a motion. We spend the $21,510 to get the doors fixed. in
Ray
the
will
sheriff's-
second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And now you're gonna have to, next we'll go to number 10, discussion and action regarding the big picture of the county's finances. So a few weeks ago, I made a list of things that I had questions on, and I assume that as we go through this year, there's probably going to be additions to this. And these are in part just some topics where I've got some questions where I want to revisit. And most of them, I think I could learn more about them. So we're really just trying to understand some of this as much or more than anything. Some of this stuff's been on the back burner for a while. We had COVID, and obviously that was a different experience in terms of how we functioned and then just trying to survive financially. So it feels like we've got a bit of a breather now to come back and address some things. So the first thing on the list that I had was the past referendums and reasons for seeking the referendums. And in my mind, that was thinking about, we had a list 3 years ago for that referendum. And that list said, here's why we need, another $1 million or so. And so have we resolved the reasons why we needed that million? What's different? I know there's at least one issue that we haven't resolved yet. And what can we learn from why we asked for those referendums, in 18 and 21?
Well, Sue and Mr. Poofall, you were here at that time too. You were here in 18 and 21 when we went through the referendums. So, Sue?
So, can I speak? Okay. So I did have a conversation with Jeff Burrow because he was administrator at the time in 18. And he said basically is that it had to do with the opioid and meth crisis at that time. The jail was full. That trickled into increased expenses in the jail, which increased expenses in the court system, which with incarcerated parents increased human services expenses as well. So it was kind of a trickle down from the drug usage to the jail, to the courts, and to the human services. And it was a large amount, which was uncontrollable. So, I mean, there was no, when someone's in jail and it goes to court, you have to pay those expenses, as well as when there's juveniles that need to be placed. We're obligated and mandated to do those placements, and the amounts were more than ever anticipated in a budget year. I mean, you know, and it seemed like it came on kind of quickly. It wasn't just like a trickle, and then it was like, all of a sudden it was here and it was an issue. So,
So as you think back on, you can still pull up the Daily Press article on that referendum, and that's what Jeff talks about in there. Is there anything about the financial situation back then that you look at or think about and say, gee, maybe we should have worked on this or did something differently? Are there lessons learned that might have made it less difficult back then that we haven't looked at yet?
I really don't think so. You know, I think a lot was because of the levy limits that were put on the counties by the state. And we didn't have the increase in equalized value to be able to increase our levy limit any higher, or to a percentage where we could accommodate those expenses that we had incurred. So, I mean, I think the levy limit had a lot to do with,
Yeah, that's why they had to have one.
that's why the referendum was like, oh, we can do a referendum and then increase our limits, but because they both failed, we weren't able. And then we fell right into COVID
Yeah,
and received care funding. So that kind of gave us a little bit of a boost for some things that we needed to cover. And then we come into ARPA. I mean, it seems like we've had a windfall. I mean, I know that you can only spend those funds on specific things, but it was like kind of what we needed to get us past what we were overexpending. And now, as Mike said, we're kind of sitting, I mean, we haven't had, I mean, I know that one of the CDs is the tribal money, the exempt property tribal money, but we have a $1 million CD that we haven't had in a long time that has sat there. You know, I mean, it's been earning interest. It isn't like we've had to cash it in early because we needed, you know, years ago, we would have to, and Tracy can attest to this, and Dan can, just from the few years he's been here, we'd have to be cutting into our money market or transferring money and going, oh my gosh, are we going to make payroll? Or, you know, and right now, I mean, knock on wood, we're sitting pretty comfortable, you know, with the way things are being managed, and with those additional funds that we received, they did really help us immensely.
so except for Mr. Pufall, you know, the rest of us weren't involved with the county. You know, when you had the opioid, you know, Heather was here too, but I meant the committee members and our administrator. But yeah, the two of you are the ones that were here before the opioid crisis hits. You kind of knew what normal was back then, quote. But now as we emerge from where we're at, it feels like I don't know what normal is on the finance end for the county other than what I read in the paper back then. So it feels like we've got to kind of get our bearings and figure out a sustainable path forward, but also want to learn the lessons from back then. So the thing I think about most about that opioid crisis in 18 is the board extrapolated the size of the jail they needed, and of course, transferring people somewhere else was expensive. So they extrapolated the size of the jail they needed, and they bought the land by the Xcel Energy plant. So to me, because we no longer have the opioid crisis like we once did. We no longer have this exponential increase in the jail population. It seems that a legacy of that opioid crisis is the county owning that land by Excel Energy. And I think that's something we should have a conversation about because it was a reaction to the opioid crisis, but that has passed. But we still own that land. We have something tied up without, it's not on the tax base. So it would seem like it's time to revisit that to me.
Another thing that, during that time, and I can't remember exactly what year, but we did, spend 600 and some thousand on solar panels. And got involved in that, around that same time. And also purchased the New Horizon, I mean, that was minimal, but purchased the New Horizons building, and there were some purchases that way, like you said, the property, out on Highway 13 or right off of there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was some big amounts being spent, with the hopes of, especially with the, solar panels, getting a rebate on what we were spending, so. But we did pay it up front, so it takes time for that to recoup. But that all kind of came into play around those years.
Any other questions or thoughts on those two referendums? Can we talk about that, adding that to number 10, that property by Excel? Because that really was just a consequence of the opioid crisis. That was the rationale for buying it, and it seems that rationale should be revisited. ARPA fundings,
Well,
Blake?
I'd like to make one more
Okay.
comment on that. Whether or not we sell that property or not, I think we should still wait for the space and security study to be done before making any decision, yes or no.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I just had one question on ARPA funding. It says uses and how much remains. I could not get to that when I went through all my attachments of how much actually remains, and I was like stumped on it. I was like, this last year, we very little, like 80,000 or 80 some thousand in 2023. But then this year we have, and so if I could just maybe understand what's earmarked and what's available.
Well, this report was included in it as well, the, March.
Yep, and you signed it as the,
Yeah.
and April, you signed it.
Yes, it was for 2023, as of 12/31/23. So the funds allocated to the Human Services Department have been spent. The 498,000. And the way that they have us, that's opioid. There it is. Nope, you just had your thing on it. Yep. Yep.
I was looking for the one for 23.
Well, this is the report for 23.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, it's as of 12/31/23.
okay.
So, the project name above this, yep, right there, the, number 3, that is for the, roof repair, the courthouse repairs. And we hadn't spent anything on, except for the 46,000 as of 12/31/23.
Yeah, we spent quite a couple $100,000. We're not gonna spend, the contract to do what they're doing right now is 950-ish. But there's still an issue with part of the roof that we need to get a contractor in for
Okay.
that. And the elevator still needs to be worked on. So this money will end up being used for repairs, and anything that's left over would just go straight into the general fund.
Then in number 1, that, That has been expenditures that were partial, and you could see in the detail of the report that premium pay, we gave an additional, or the county gave an additional amount to correctional officers. So a portion of that additional amount was charged to ARPA funding. And then we're also using it for IT, for courtroom.
All this stuff.
So, and then the bottom one is the human services.
So the 1.5 is what we had left coming into this year.
So just to make sure I'm clear on the courthouse and the ARPA funding and the tuck pointing and the roof, I believe when we originally set money aside, we were thinking all these things were going to get done by a contractor. We're going to try to do it at the same time. We
Right.
ended up splitting the job, but we have the ARPA money. We're thinking the tuck pointing's around $1 million or a little more,
A little less, like 930.
930 then. And so we have a balance of roughly $500,000
Right.
towards the roof. So if you do find a contractor this year while the scaffolding is up.
Yep.
We already have money in the budget for it. And
Correct.
it's been approved for that use.
Correct.
Okay.
And I will still bring that to the agreement to the county board to approve that purchase. If we get a contractor.
Do you have any idea if you're going to find a contractor?
We are trying as hard as we can. Dave is calling every day, trying to find somebody. It's just so hard to get contractors up here. Nobody wants to work up here.
And if you can't find somebody and the scaffolding comes down, would it come down then?
The scaffolding is going to have to come down at the end of August,
And then they'd have to repeat that expense to.
or
a
they'd
lot
have
of
to
it.
use a lift or something.
All right.
In
Anything-
the
anything
meantime,
else?
Dave is going to figure out some solution to get us through the winter if we can't find anybody. Put some bubble gum on it or something.
So if we can't find somebody, we still have this money allocated by the end of 2024. So we're still okay with
Yes,
using it appropriately then.
yes. And I would say in the budget, and then when we pass in November, we'll have an exact dollar amount that's left.
Okay.
And we just allocate it again to that, just so there's no questions.
Okay. Anything else on the ARPA funding? Next on the list was the opioid funds, the balance and allocation. So you gave us some numbers there. We've got more money coming in. And on those allocations, do you have an idea of how much those allocations help us in our budget versus if we didn't have those, given the uses they have to go for?
Well, we have not used any of that money for our budget.
But we did approve using some of it.
The opioid money, no, we haven't.
I thought we did for,
No, we haven't approved using any opioid funds. So we have a roughly, a little over $200,000 sitting there right now that we need to decide what to do with. Whether that's at the sheriff's department or the Health and Human Services Department or both. We need to figure out what to do with it. We should be getting a revenue stream of close to 100,000 every year for the next 6 years. After that, it tapers down quite a bit. Because the litigants had the opportunity of doing it over 7 years or over 20 years. And those who chose 20 years could, at a later point, decide to do 7 years, which is what happened with Johnson & Johnson. So we do have a limited pool of money and we have not used any of it yet.
We currently have, at the end of May, 247,000 in the opioid
Yeah.
account.
so how are we going to decide using it?
Well, I think that's something that HHS and PPLE should discuss. Since they're the policy arms of those two departments. And then the request should come here to spend it.
I think we should ask for maybe the sheriff's department as well to see if there's anything just from an opioid related, just
Right.
to make sure, and then have them say, hey, here's our proposals, here's what we'd like to do with this money.
Yeah, I can tell you the sheriff's department just received, well, they received it a little while ago, but it was announced today. A $200,000 grant for the MAT program, which is the medicated assisted treatment. And that was from the state share of the opioid funds. So Attorney General Call was up here today to announce it. So they have already hired somebody, a social worker, to administer the program, and they are administering the treatment as we speak. So, you know, that's one of the ways the sheriff's department can use this money is for treatment when people are at the worst. I know HHS is looking at a what you call a house for people to go, like a halfway house, you know, for people to transition back into society after while continuing to receive treatments.
Didn't they ask us about approving money from the opioid fund for that a while back?
No, HHS was talking about it.
They were only talking about it and it was
Yeah,
to see if we supported it, but we didn't vote to do that then.
yeah, we didn't do it yet.
Okay.
You know, I think we need to look at the transitional housing is a good idea. But are we better served by giving it to a nonprofit organization that specializes in that? You know, so you can treat more people effectively than if we have a county-owned facility that were to do it, or contracting out to individual homes like HHS was talking about.
So are you going to talk to those two departments about?
Yeah, in fact, I talked to Terry about it briefly today. And Brian.
Okay, so one of the things, two things strike me. One is if it helps us to keep the jail at less than capacity from a budget standpoint, that's a good thing, you know, besides being good for the people. The other thing is if we are applying for grants, it's hard to demonstrate a need when you've got a bunch of money sitting that you're not using.
Right.
So, okay. Anything else on the opioids?
Not today.
Okay. Health insurance, this is where the institutional knowledge will come in handy. Back in 2021, when we had a referendum, one of the items on the list of why the county wanted nearly $1 million is because of our health insurance. We had not been charging the employees enough on their end, and we had loaned money from the general fund. So that is sat on the back burner for 3 years as we dealt with COVID and whatever, but I'd like to revisit where do we go from here on that issue?
Well, I could tell you that we haven't had to borrow from the general fund since 21, and that was January 21, right?
Yeah.
So that 1.3 million you see that Steve was talking about at the last meeting, that's from that time period. Changes made to the health insurance fund by this committee and executive committee have made a huge difference in keeping the plan afloat. When we get to it later, I want you to take those numbers with a grain of salt because there's still a lot of outstanding claims. I think health insurance has gotten better. It is cash flowing now. I think we still need to work on dental insurance. That's still underwater. Yeah, for the most part, it's underwater. So there might need to be a slight increase for dental. But overall, it's gotten better, and you know the monthly numbers you see should bear that out.
So we're not adding to the deficit on an annual basis like we
No.
did for a long time. But then what do we do with that deficit from a finance perspective?
Well, if I were to make a suggestion, I would say that, you know, even if we see cost savings this year on the health insurance and we end up with a surplus in the account, we need to build that account up, first of all. So there is a constant surplus in there in case we have another pandemic or some other thing happens. So that we have extra cash sitting there and it doesn't cause a deficit again. Once we get to a certain level, which this committee can decide, I would say $1 million, then we start paying the county general fund back.
So right at the moment, if I recall, when we set the insurance rates, we were shooting for that break-even point.
Right.
And if that's what we're shooting for, and on average we hit it, then we're not going to be having a fund to build up to 1 million, let alone address the deficit.
No,
So it seems that if we're going to build up some reserve and address the deficit, that we need to have a rate that we anticipate be higher than the break even to start working at that reserve and the deficit.
Yeah, or we could look at cost savings elsewhere within the plan. So, you know, we already addressed one of those by switching pharmacy providers. Pharmacy numbers have gone down quite a bit with Scout RX. And they achieved their savings because they have their own pharmacy. And so they can fill everything there and mail it out. And the really high priced drugs they get from Canada, where it costs are a lot cheaper. So that's one way. One thing, you know, Heather and I talked to M3 yesterday. Another idea is getting direct primary care. So like your own walk-in clinic, basically, where we'd pull patients from Tamarack, who's charging obscene amounts, to a fixed amount from direct primary care. That's something we could look at teaming up with the school to fund, or some other local businesses who may want to be interested in that kind of model to save their own money in healthcare. If we do something like that, then we're saving money on the service, providing the same level of service that employees are used to, and we're still not raising rates, which should start to build a cushion. So we're looking at the other cost savings within the plan to try to rein in that everything.
So if I were to summarize that, except for whatever annual rate of increase we have in health insurance premiums, if you can find additional ways of saving money, that savings relative to what you otherwise would be charging would go towards a pool to build up the fund
Yes,
and pay towards the deficit.
correct.
So how are we going to track that in accounting terms?
That's a Sue question.
And we have changed the way that we fund that. I mean, we still fund it by the department's budgeting for it. But monthly, Heather's getting a check in the account for what actually was expended for that month for the benefit. So that's made I know this is off the topic of what you asked, but that has helped a lot in that fund. And the way that, oh, go ahead, the stop line. Go ahead.
Because in the past, we used to just pull from the general fund as needed, and now on a monthly basis, I get a check from payroll for the benefit amount and the employee share. So that's it's a constant cash flow now. But as far, I don't.
We're still going to have to look at cost savings and maybe a premium increase to get to that cushion that we need.
We definitely need to raise the premium. We talked about dental, so I don't know why, like last year, she mentioned you guys are way off on this funding.
Yep.
So like, when we go into benefit enrollment in November, we have to notify our employees, hey, your dental is not gonna look the same. Is that something we can just do, or do they balk at us? I guess, how do we change that?
Well, they're definitely going to balk at us. They're definitely not going to be happy with any increase, but and all of you are going to hear about it too. I guarantee you that. But yeah, the dental is underwater and there needs to be a premium change on that.
Well, that's an educational thing that, Dan, I'm gonna ask you to do it to their bosses so that they don't call me.
They're still going to call you.
And it's fine. And that's our job, is to say, hey, we're not here to, and again, employees are gonna complain about this, and inflation is painful for everybody, but at the end of the day, this $1 million deficit never goes away if we don't do something.
Yep.
And it's on our balance sheet today,
Yes, it is.
hurting us. So let's, like Pat keeps wanting to talk about it. Well, we got to change something.
Well, one of the things I think about is, and I went through, we just bit the bullet where I worked when this happened. On the one hand, I think you guys have been incredibly blessed for a long time. And that's true. We bit the bullet, and trust me, where I was, you better not complain about it if you wanted to stay there. But one of the things I think about with this is, yes, I know how it feels because I felt it. Is the longer this is put off, the employees on average who benefited from this have hit retirement or left, and the new ones are bearing the burden of others that had received it before. So on the one hand, it's painful, to employees, but the longer it gets strung out, those who have benefited tend to be going out the door, and the new people, are paying for it. So that strikes me as not fair, but then I'm not quite sure what to do with it. What you said in general, I think we could pursue, but we need a way of tracking it. So everybody says, yep, this is what we talked about, put in writing, and that makes sense that, so as we're trying to say, where are we at with this? We're on the same page. So if we can find ways of saving money, especially if there's programs where employees have an incentive to say, hey, if I do or don't do this, there's an incentive in that for me. We would, we could look at that. So,
Yeah, so when the county added dental insurance, for the employees, it was kind of a, well, we're not gonna give a raise, but we're gonna give you dental, and we're gonna try to make it as, I don't know, maybe it wasn't a raise, but we were getting maybe a couple of holidays taken away or something, and so then they said, well, we'll do the dental and we'll keep it very minimal. And I don't think at the time that it was put in that they really understood the usage that it was going to get right from the get-go. So, I mean, there was one year, let's say we took in 65,000 in premiums and we paid out 140,000. I mean, it was just like, there was no way that what the employees were paying towards the dental was going to fund any of the claims for the most part.
Yeah, it was normally doubled almost every year.
and this committee 4 years or so ago, there was strong support for maintaining dental. But we underfunded that. The good news, is you had a dental plan, but we were underfunding it. So we got to a point where we're pretty close on funding, and the committee then, and I probably still feel that way, is, that's an important part of your healthcare package, and so something we should keep. But Dan, I want to ask you a question, and I'm thinking about when I was in the city council, the city general fund loaned the water and wastewater utility, it was like $1 million some bucks or more. Because the council prior to my time didn't want to raise water and sewer rates. But eventually the Public Service Commission said, you have to. So after 10 years of not raising them, they had to raise rates. And part of the study that the PSC looked at was you need to repay the general fund, and I believe you had to repay it with interest. That was out of the control of the city council on how they dealt with repaying that general fund. So my question to Dan on this one is, are there any legal considerations on how we deal with this issue that we need to be aware of as far as squaring things up?
Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. No, there's not. A water utility and sewer utility are utilities. And they are regulated by the PSC. What we're offering is a benefit to an employee. It's part of their pay package. And if we go deficit spending on it, that's our problem. There's no obligation to repay it on the employee's part.
So I guess one other thought I have on this for things to think about as we discuss this is several years ago, I asked for the history of pay increases that employees had received. And those rate increases were under the rate of inflation for that 10-year period. And so we did a wage study. Ideally, we keep wages consistent with inflation. I don't know that we've done that as well as we would have liked recently. But part of what I'm thinking about is if wages don't keep up with inflation, in fairness to employees, could we consider reducing the amount that is owed to that healthcare fund if the wages aren't keeping up with inflation? Because that would seem to have some fairness and equitableness to it,
We could certainly write that money off if that's a concern.
especially if we're not keeping up with raises. So last year, the raise was under the inflation rate. You know, and that's, you know, the base isn't as big as it's, you know, otherwise would be going forward for the future raises then either, so.
Yeah, yeah, if this committee wants to write that off, we certainly can do that. I mean, or rather, the county board can do that, but I agree there is some rationale for doing it. I mean, we're not liable to pay it back anytime in the near future.
So if we go back to 2021, when we finally got the health insurance premiums, you know, covering what it was costing back to where they should be, if we go back to the raises since 2021 and look at those relative to inflation, and if those raises have not kept up with inflation, which I believe they have not,
No, they have not.
and then we look at saying, okay, we haven't kept raises up with inflation, in fairness to employees, let's consider the following with the health insurance deficit.
And that would equal the deficit for raises. The raises would be more than 1.3 million.
Yes, I think if you delve into those numbers and talk to staff and see if there's any other considerations
Yeah.
that we should think about, I think it seems like a fair thing, but I also think this is an issue that one way or the other we should resolve. And in part because the first thing on the list is the referendums. We know that we can only raise the general levy up to net new construction, which is always, you know, like a 0.5% at best or whatever. So we know at some point, the county's likely, unless things change, we're gonna have to have a referendum to raise the general levy. And I wouldn't want to see on that list the same issue, you know, from the 2021 referendum, because it would just say we haven't dealt with it.
Right.
So,
I'm not convinced we're gonna need a referendum.
well, at some point, and we probably won't be here, I hope it. But I mean, I'm just thinking about the numbers. You know, net new construction is so low, inflation is higher, and
I understand, but I mean, we're gonna have a different legislature next year and
So what you're talking about has an obvious impact on balance sheet. Mike, I see you kind of in the background there. What do you think for our sake? Does this make sense for us to be considering this? I guess otherwise it's just a liability that no one deals with.
Yeah, I can respond to that a little bit. First of all, I agree with Dan that there is no legal or outside authority that controls how you handle this. You know, like the Public Service Commission with water rates. And I'm quite familiar with that too, because I've dealt with that for a long time. Yeah, I mean, that was interesting to sort of offset the idea Pat had about offsetting some of that. So in a sense, what you're telling your employees, what you're not, we haven't been giving you raises, but we're not raising your health insurance because we're gonna write off a portion of the deficit. That has some merit to me. But I think I just took a look at where you're at. I mean, you did build up a little bit of a health insurance fund balance. I'm looking at your 22 audit report. I mean, you kind of generated, I don't know, 200 to 300,000 to build back your fund in 22.
yeah,
Or
I
reduce the
think in
deficit, I guess.
Mike, I think in 21, they took out 1.5 million.
Yeah, well, the 22 audit had 1.8 million as an
Yeah.
advance. Yeah,
All right,
it's 1.8 million. So, and I don't believe that was reduced in 23. I do not believe so. but I say you did have 400. I mean, your equity was 1.5 million, the old 1.3. So you did generate about 300,000 in 22. I don't know what you, but again, um, I don't know what 23 is going to look like when they're done with the audit because they put various accruals and outstanding to calculate outstanding claims too. So that'll be interesting to see that on a full accrual basis, what 23 looks like. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is there's a combination of things you can do. You can pay back some of it. Use use that plan of saying, hey, we didn't raise wages the way we should have, but we're going to prevent future increases in health insurance. That has some merit to me, so it makes sense to me. So, I don't know if I'm helping you out or not, but I'm just kind of giving you some of the how I would look at this. Um, and I agree with Dan too. You need to build up a surplus in there probably before you pay back the general fund. So I think maybe revisit it after you see the 23 audit numbers and kind of look at where you're at and maybe bring this back to the committee at that time, which should be only a month or two.
In the
Right.
in the meantime, I can try to get M3 to come here for the next meeting to talk about what they're planning for the future.
Yep, and then if you can talk to staff some to get some input, because what Blake said I agree with. It's, it looks like something on the balance sheet on the plus side of what we would otherwise have, but it's not really there. So let's, because of the hour, let's go to 11 and then 12, and then we'll come back to the list in 10 at the next meeting and continue with things that we didn't get to. So going to number 11, discussion and action on the sheriff department vehicle.
Okay, so yes, 2 days ago, we approved, Nate, can you get on? 2 days ago, we approved the law enforcement contract with the city of Mellon. We have to buy a vehicle for that. The question is, do we purchase a vehicle for roughly 65, 70,000 once it's fully outfitted? Or do we lease a vehicle for 4 years at about 16,000 a year, fully outfitted? And that's the reason why it came to this committee, because there's a big difference between laying out 65, 70 than it is committing to 4 years for 16,000. My personal opinion is we're probably better off purchasing the vehicle because it'll probably last longer than 4 years. And, we need some more vehicles in rotation. I know Nate has some opinions too.
Nate, do you want to tell us what you think?
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with Dan. I think in this situation where the city of Mellon's paying for that, they chose to pay for a vehicle, including the equipment in there. I think it'd be better off and probably in our county's best interest to just purchase it out. And then it's another vehicle, we're away from fees from the enterprise leasing agreement and stuff too. So, and like Dan said, it's something that we maybe can use longer than the 48 months that we get out of the lease from enterprise.
So if this lasts longer than 4 years and we're still with Mellon, would it still be used for Mellon? And would they have the benefit of that longer life, or is it some other plan?
No, I think that would be a plan of like what we determine we want to use. So if after the 3 or 4 year contract isn't re-signed with Mellon, if they decide that they don't want to renew it, then that's obviously our vehicle, purchased through our services. So we could either sell it or leave it into our fleet, which is like Dan said, we're still short on cars and stuff. So to me, I would like to retain some of them just to have extra squad cars too.
Yeah, there's been a rash of accidents with cars lately. Deer hittings and stuff like that. So it'd be nice to have another car or two in the fleet while that one car is getting repaired. So even after the 4 years, if this car is still good, it could be a replacement vehicle for a vehicle that's in for repair.
Because it's going to be primarily based in Mellon, it's probably going to be much more lower mileage
Yes,
over the time, which should lengthen the lifespan as well.
Right.
And so I think that purchase makes sense because getting done after 4 years, it's still going to be a lower mileage than the other squad cars. And it could just be a rotated in, but it is going to have to say City of Mellon on it though, right?
no, it doesn't.
I thought that's what was in the
Yeah.
agreement.
Nate,
It's got melon on it. So
Nate, you're the city council member in Mellon.
Yeah, so I do, I'd have to revisit that on this, because there was a couple, 2 or 3 contracts floating around, and I remember one of the contracts saying that something signified the city of Mellon on it, but with the final draft that they did, I still haven't went through that whole thing, so I don't, if Brad's saying it was in there on this last one, that it's still in there, I don't remember seeing it.
It might have been in the previous one too, because I saw different ones. I'm just looking now.
Because
I
I know
don't- the
there
de-
is something when I just brushed over that contract that there must have been some amendments made to the initial one that I seen at the front end of it.
In any case, it's just decal that can be removed.
Yes.
Blake,
Just so I'm clear, we made a change in how we purchase vehicles last year from purchasing to leasing.
Yes.
And so will this be the only one that we purchase?
For the time being, yes.
Okay, and I trust you guys, you have a
It-
better sense of what to do here. I just wasn't sure because I know we had made this idea of not wanting to purchase and now,
Right.
but it makes sense to keep a low mileage vehicle in Mellon specific. And then if you're saying you're short cars, this would be an asset and I get it.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Because the lease cars are on the road all the time and they're putting the miles on them like crazy. Whereas this car was not going to get as many miles and it could be used to rotate in when cars are being repaired.
do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to purchase a squad car for the new agreement in Mellon.
We have a
the
motion by
contract.
Ray. Is there a second?
Blake will second that.
We have a second by Blake. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And number 12, discussion action on the Northwest SEP request.
Okay, so I wasn't able to be at the meeting, but I talked to my counterparts in Bayfield and Price County. So Northwest SEP has been having some financial problems. At first, it sounded like it was a huge problem, like $500,000 size problem. Now, it's a little bit easier. They're asking each of the 11 counties that they serve to either give them a grant or a loan of $5,000 to help them with the current year expenses. The main reason why they lost they need the money is sorry. Stop. They lost their federal funding went down from 1.7 million to 1.3 million. So they lost 400,000 in revenue. They also lost a food share grant which they had 4 employees working on, but they kept 2 of them. And let's see, UW is 2.5 months behind in their payments. And most importantly is they couldn't find any accounting staff. So the whole issue just sort of crept up on them until they hired Whipfley out to work for them. But Whipfley doesn't get back to them for months either because they're busy. So both Price County and Bayfield County have agreed to give them a $5,000 loan payable by the end of the year. And that's a 0 interest loan.
The end of 2025.
No, this year, end of
This year?
24.
That was 25.
No, end of 24, they're asking for.
In the resolution and the packet, it does say December 31st, 2025
Okay, Bayfield County says 24 then.
for Price County.
Yeah. So, sorry, I just lost the Zoom. So, I don't know, whatever you decide, if you decide you want to make a loan or a grant, it still has to go to the county board.
So do you think there's any chance they'd repay this by the end of 2024?
Yeah, that's when they're most flush with cash.
Okay.
Do we give money to them now?
No, I don't think so.
So they service a 10-county area.
They use federal funding.
Okay, so we don't actually, so this is a unique funding.
Right.
list, okay.
We're not obligated to do it. If there were a case of malfeasance, like somebody embezzled $100,000, then the counties would be on the hook to make that up.
I thought our board chair told me that if there's a deficit, they have the right to go to the counties for funds. So he's online if he wants to address
Right.
this.
So I talked to, Price County has a board member that's very actively involved with SEP, so I was able to find out more about what's going on. Like I said, if there's a case of malfeasance, so like an embezzlement, then SEP has a right to go to the counties to make up that fund.
Okay.
In this case, it's just bad accounting. So we are under no legal obligation to do anything. I could tell you all the counties are going to give them the money. At the 0%. But nonetheless, we'd have to do a resolution like the one in the packet.
So your recommendation is 2024?
The amount is so low, I don't care if it's 24 or 25.
Do you have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve a $5,000 loan, 0% interest till 2024, end of the year, 12/31, to the Northwest SEP.
Is there a second?
Ron will second.
We have a second by Ron. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, and this will go to the county board then. Sorry, go back to the agenda. Okay, so health insurance update.
We'll go to 13, the health insurance update.
All right, again, I want to caution everybody that there has not been all the charges charged to our account yet. So this number is not real. Apparently Tamarac's been backed up in their invoicing. I can give you an example. I went there in February to get stitches here, and I still haven't gotten a bill yet. So, just saying. So, but it does look good, and the trends are good. And it might be real, who knows? But take it with a grain of salt.
All right. Any questions on this? Then we'll go to 14, investments.
And these are, they are what they are.
So those are showing the 3%.
Right, so when they mature, they'll move up to 4 or 5, or whatever the current rate they can give us is, if interest rates change. The Fed changes rates.
Any questions on those? So earlier in this meeting, Sue was talking about what things looked like 3 years ago, and we didn't have numbers like that.
In fact, when you look at interest from last year opposed to this year,
Yeah.
one of the supervisors who was looking at one of the past books, and it was $15 a month last year, the average, and it went up to like 58 this year, and it's like, yeah, and wondering why that happened. Well, the interest rates have
Yeah.
increased, and so.
Yeah.
Sales tax.
Sales tax report.
Okay, so I changed how we do this, and if you guys want me to change it back, I can. But PMA sends us a report every month that does the exact same thing that you're getting in the packet, except it gives us every single county. And I figured, it's probably not a bad thing to compare how we're doing to other counties. And so I put the whole thing into the packet.
I was just shocked a little bit because I didn't look at Adams County at top, and I was like, what changed? Because we were higher than that.
Yeah.
And then I noticed it, and I think this is fine. I don't mind scrolling through all the different ones and seeing Bayfield and Iron County around.
Yeah.
And Price County and stuff. So I think it's good.
Yeah, electronic copies I think are nice, but I wouldn't print this out, and especially in color.
No, I'm not, no, if anybody wants a printed copy, we'll just print the one page for Ashland County. But, I think it's good to compare, and, our sales tax numbers went up again, so.
When I scrolled through these, what really struck me is our percent increases are the highest over the tourist season, which means we definitely benefit from the tourist traffic compared to some of these other counties. But it's also a reminder that our economy, perhaps isn't as diverse as some economies that are less dependent on tourism. It's a two-edged sword. It's nice to have the tourist benefit, but you also want a diverse economy because they stand up best in times of recessions.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure it's all tourists, because, we didn't have snow, and the Hotel Schwamigan was filled every night, but it was with contractors.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether we're seeing what we're seeing, to be honest with you. I don't think we have enough data. But I just like the fact that the numbers are going up.
Well, and
Yeah,
based off
sure.
of my drive down from Bayfield today, there's a lot of people in the area
Yeah.
this weekend. It's gonna be a busy tourist day
Yeah.
weekend too, so we should see a good one for June as well.
Yeah,
Oh,
Chairman
yes,
Kinney?
I did.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that's pretty obvious is going up is everything costs more. The more it costs, the more you pay in sales tax.
Mhm.
And I'll give you
Sure.
a good example. I bought a car in January and well, that car, both of those cars cost more money than they did a year ago. So you're gonna get more sales tax. But when you go to the grocery store or anyplace else, costs are up a little, so sales tax is gonna be up. I think that's not terrible, but it is a tax collection. And people are spending money. For anybody who says the economy is doing poorly, I would tend to disagree to some point. I mean, I don't see people stopping spending, which is good for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chairman Merchant makes a good point there that, and that does explain the continuous increase from when inflation started. That prices went up, so sales tax goes up.
But also, like you said, we're not seeing that across the state as the economy is doing good in Ashland
Yeah,
because people are spending money, but you don't see those increases as high at other places in the state. I mean, Adams County was down.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's not just that. I don't know where Adams County is, but it's not just that.
right.
Because the economy is doing really well and people are going out to restaurants here, and maybe it's because we have a bunch of contractors that are staying in the hotel and they're eating out every day. And so that's where it comes, because buildings are happening and road construction and things
Right.
that are coming in, it's good. So, yeah, but the economy is doing really well and we're benefiting from, because people are spending money, even though things are more expensive, people are still expending.
Right. And that's why I thought the comparison was really good to see here. Like you look at Brown County, which is much bigger than us, and they're only 1.7% up.
So in terms of format, the committee happy with this format versus the previous? Okay, all right. So go to the next item. The register of deed information was there, which
Yes.
we could all scroll through on our own.
Yep. And I gave you my update the other day, so.
Yeah, for updates, could you give us an update where we're at with the Bad River contract that we had for law enforcement as far as resolving that?
We're in the same spot we have been. I did speak to my counterpart over there, and they had one question, and so I asked them to send that question to Steve. Whether they pay or not, still up for
Whether
debate.
they pay anything or at all?
Yeah, it's still debatable.
So-
So that's a question we're gonna have to decide what to do with.
Yeah, and I was thumbing through the audit looking for some stuff, and that's where that question came from, because it shows up on the positive side of the ledger, but we're not gonna get the number that's in there.
Right.
And so it's another issue that we should resolve. And then we know where we're
Well,
we're
It's
off.
it's not only that, it affects a lot of other things.
Yeah,
Affects the operations of the sheriff's department too.
yeah, so we should resolve that.
Well, we're willing to resolve it, but it takes two sides.
Anything else on updates? Nope. Then let's go to scheduling the next meeting.
We already have it scheduled for July 18th, I believe.
We're gonna leave it at July 18th and
Let me just go to the calendar here, make sure. Do we want to keep it at 3 o'clock or you want to move it back a little bit?
to me, if we move it back a bit, then we don't have staff here past 4, hopefully.
Well, you know, Sue might be here anyhow, but yeah, Lori would not be staying past 4.
I'm fine with starting earlier if that's works for others, especially those who have to go to work.
July is a little bit busy month and there's chance that I will be on the water until 1:30 or 2 in Bayfield. And so it might be tough, but I can try my best. So
2:30?
Yeah, whatever's good for the committee is,
Do you want to change it to 2:30 and is that okay?
I don't, yeah, because I remember Blake's probably gonna have baseball games and I have to leave early anyway.
He's gonna
so-
be done with baseball by then.
Oh, is it done by
Yeah.
July 18th?
you can always show up late if you have to.
We leave, what time is 2:30 or 3?
Right now it's scheduled for 3.
Let's go 2:30 and then just for staff, that's better than.
Okay,
And then one more motion. Ron,
Ron will make a motion, we adjourn.
is there a second? Not that we need one.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye, opposed, motion carried. Thank you.